All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is SIC Talks number 67. I'm here with Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick, or Kyle, or KRF, as he goes by. Definitely not Tyler under any circumstances, so we're not saying that. But in any case, I don't know how I got introduced to Kyle's work, to be honest. I found his newsletter, which comes out on Sundays, and he will tell us the official name of, because I don't want to guess. It's complicated. I don't want to guess at it. But it is a just fascinating to me digest, not dissimilar to SIC, of news and developments in contemporary culture, spanning politics to media to entertainment to LGBTQ and queer culture to international sort of affairs and all this kind of stuff. It's really really sensational. I've, over the last year and a half, 2 years, have pulled tons of stories from it. I really consider it a prime source, but I also consider it kind of a best kept secret, because it is one of those things that most people in my universe don't know about somehow. I don't know why. I'm here to change that to some degree or another, and that's why I asked Kyle to come on the show. But even somebody, an expert as august as Casey Lewis, who does the after school newsletter, I would link to Trent to Trend Report or however you call it, Kyle. And Casey got in touch and was like, "What is this? Where did you get this?" And I was like, "Casey, you know everything. I literally can't tell Casey anything. It's ridiculous." Even though she does want to know like what my daughter is up to and stuff, because she loves, like tracking teens. So would you please, if you don't mind, introduce yourself past what I've already said and kind of tell us how you think of what the newsletter is, how you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great introduction. Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick. I read the Trend Report. It's just called the Trend Report. The trademark thing in the end is just like, I put it as a joke because I just like, it's a performance of like serious or professional or wwhatever, which I think in this day and age is sort of contrived and bullshit anyway. So it's sort of, it is what it is. And I think it's just hilarious to add anyway. And just like, it's a little maybe wink to the shit poster in me. Because it's definitely, it is a serious affair, but it's also not serious at all. Anyway, so it, as you said, it's sort of like a curation of culture, if you will, being very broad. And it's always been something I've sort of done. I've had a lot of different careers, be it I worked in Hollywood for a long time as sort of like producer, social media producer, manager sort of person, but also as a journalist and as a fiction writer too. And these things always are sort of happening in the background via my like personal blogs, which I've had a few different versions of. And eventually when I was working at different companies, I was sort of doing versions of the Trend Report where I was just sort of, bored and or always want to be doing something. I was like, I'm just going to like send out to my team like things you need to know about within our industry. And then like, for example, when I was at Nickelodeon, I was doing this and like it got something so big, I was like, we need to be sending this to the president. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, that sounds amazing. So like things like that end up happening. And then like eventually when I left that job, I started doing it myself.
Let me stop you for a second. So this was just something that you just sort of decided to do because you felt like the people around you would benefit from the information.
Absolutely.
Okay, so exactly like SIC in that regard, then. Weirdly enough.
Exactly.
So,
and I think the thing about it too, and I think that this is something that like I try to put in, and maybe this is a similar philosophy you have, is that like my job is not to be like a trend forecaster. I don't like, that's a very technical job, and I think that it's a job that's like I don't know, like I don't think that a lot of investment should be put in that, because it's hard to predict the future. That's why we blah blah blah. So like I think that like it's a difficult prospect, and I make no claims at that, but how I sort of see the world is like through storylines, and like I sort of see patterns, see storylines, see whatever, and like that's usually what becomes like the Trend Report essays. It's like these are the bigger things sort of breaking out, and like these are the bigger sort of storylines that I've noticed or that are appealing to me. Sometimes they can be as like really broad ranging and capturing something that everybody is sort of talking about, to something where it's just like, I have noticed this in a one-on-one conversation I had with somebody. And ironically, those things are always the things where people are like, oh my God, you're right. And I'm like, what? Like, I literally had this with one person, and here we are. Anyway, so we're all talking the same things.
So, well, except, and I would draw a distinction here as a way of also giving you a lot of credit. I think your level of I would characterize what I do as pattern recognition, information distribution, weak signals, loose connections, that sort of stuff. You add in a layer of what I think is pretty invaluable analysis that I don't have the patience for, or I don't know if I don't have the patience for. I just don't. I don't know if the world needs my analysis, and I definitely need yours. So take that for what it's worth.
Well,
But
thank you.
you're welcome. But I really love, that's one of the things I really love about your output, is that you add a layer of analysis to the pattern recognition that makes it meaningful, but isn't just sort of restating the things you're observing.
Yeah,
It's building upon that and then further drawing the kind of loose connections. Where did that come from?
absolutely.
Like
I mean,
why that stuff?
yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of a few things. I think that the main thing is that, like, I am not by trade because I'm not getting paid for it, but like I've studied like
Huh.
fiction writing and in grad school, and then in undergrad I was I studied English and theater. So like a lot of the things that I sort of do is sort of based in a sort of storytelling aspect, or sort of trying to get to a more maybe emotional truth, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that really sort of like is the
Interesting.
driver of things, is to think about this stuff less mechanically and more sort of like emotionally, and like as people, and really personalizing stuff. Like I think like that sort of thing is like what really has, I've written a lot over the years, and like this is the first thing somehow where it's like breaking through. And I think a lot of that has to do with this sort of maybe more essayistic take that it can have a lot of the times. And I think that that
Sure.
is something that I've always wanted to do at other places, but like it never quite connected. And I think a lot of that also has to do with something that I would always like bristle at, with not bristle, but like have a hard time sort of like trying to land with editors, was like I link a lot. Like I think like linking a lot is the modern footnote. It's like Easter
Yeah.
eggs. It's sort of like it's showing your
Yeah.
sources, that I think is invaluable. And I think that that is, it's of a kind. Like I know you're doing it, I'm doing it, a lot of people are doing it, but I think in the essay form, it really makes it more three-dimensional. And I think something like that is like, it's I don't think I invented this genre, but like I think that's definitely a sort of a sort of stone that I don't think enough people are turning over. And I think sometimes the links can be anything from like this is a deep study to like this is a meme with a catchphrase that like I'm thinking when I
Yeah.
write this down, and like
Yeah.
no one's clicking them all. But I think that that's sort of like where it's all coming in, is like a mixture of these sort of creative artist's mind, but then also like having worked as a journalist and worked as like a TV producer, those two things coming together and like making your own TV show. Hence the trademark. I'm kidding, but yes.
Well, it's yeah. I don't know. I feel like, and I guess upon listening to you talk, I guess my version of the essay, to the extent that it's, you could even consider it that, is the ordering and the linking of the various stories that I'm pointing to, which are all
Yeah.
basically like quotations from other people's headlines or whatever it is, by design. But I love the fact that you zoom out, you zoom in, you zoom out, and I love the fact that you get into so many different sources and platforms, particularly ones that I don't have time nor inclination nor access to. So anyway, it's, like I said, it's a really valuable story. However, I also wonder how you do it all. People ask me all the time. They're just like, how do you put this thing together? There's so much here. Surely you don't have enough time to do it. I know how I do it, but I also look at I look at your level of output, particularly now that you've added the paid tier and we have multiple newsletters a week. And I'm just like, I literally don't know how Kyle does it. And I sort of wonder, are you, my wife, sorry, as a quick corollary, my wife worked for a number of years for Baz Luhrmann, the movie director, and his wife, Catherine Martin, who's his creative partner and an Oscar winner. And she, and Baz just runs around all day with his phone and just makes voice notes. And
Yeah.
I wondered to what extent. I was just like, maybe Kyle is just doing voice notes, or like, engaging ChatGPT, or I don't know. It's just your output is prodigious, and so I'm curious about that.
There probably is a much more effective, efficient way via voice notes.
I feel the same.
Via ChatGPT.
I feel the same.
It is like, I think at this point, it's just a part of like the sort of mad practice that I have, and it depends on the month or the year because it changes and goes ebbs and flows over time. But like, I think a lot of it just has to do with the sort of like being really clever with using bookmarking on different sites, number one, and then keeping a sort of like a mother soup of a doc that I sort of like. I have a format that I go to every week, and then I start populating it, and like I will refine it and go back and forth. At its best, I'm able to input things, at least the links. The links are the easy part. It's like putting the links in real time with the commentary. So then I can go back and refine and take things out and figure out what story each link section is telling. But then like the essays usually are a sort of like Friday, Saturday thing, for better or worse. So sometimes it'll be like, if I have to write both essays on Saturday and or on Sunday, I've lost my weekend, and it's like, this sucks, but you know what? I'm going to carry that cross up that hill because I made that mess. I had to deal with it. But yeah, so like that's usually how it is. And it's just, it's also it's a matter of like what's trending, what's happening in my life, what's happening in the larger world, and like what is my capacity for like writing. Like there hasn't been any major like fuck up, for lack of better words, in like a year of like I just ran out of time. Like that hasn't happened in a very long time. Thankfully I'm able to push through it and or like write through a really awful hangover. Sometimes it's the best writing you can do.
Barcelona is a fun city. It's a good vibe over there.
It's a good vibe. We don't know enough people for it to be the best vibe yet. It's just now it's sort of like watching a lot of people be like, wow, what a great life they must have. One day we'll have that.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. It can always improve and always get better. Well, okay. So speaking of Barcelona, I take by your accent that you didn't start out in Barcelona. Where did you come from, and how did you end up there? What was the impetus?
So I most immediately moved from Los Angeles. I was in LA for 15 years, which was the longest that I lived anywhere. But my dad was in the military, so we lived everywhere. I never lived anywhere for more than 3-4 years. Went to something like some ridiculous, obscene amount of schools, like something from like 14, I think, through my whole like preschool all the way through like high school, and then even transferring in college. So like I've always sort of been moving and sort of used to a sort of an organized chaos, let's say. And I think that is sort of how the sort of door got open to like, you know what, I can move somewhere else. I've done that my whole life. Why don't I consider something else? And that, you know, also I think hitting your mid to late 30s, you're like, oh, what else can life have? And then you go.
I got it. Kyle, I'm gonna do a SIC Talks first and take a live phone call from my daughter here. I don't know what this is about, so let me just find out.
Go ahead.
Hi, Harper. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Come on over. Okay, bye. Oh, okay. Yes, I will. Bye. All right. I'm, by the way, fully keeping that. That was my daughter very nicely asking if she could bring a friend over and then continuing to ask if the friend could stay for dinner. Anyway, I'm going to have to then get up and let her in. This is warts and all. There will be no editing, so you'll see this all as part of the pod. Welcome to my home.
Lovely.
Okay, and so then does Barcelona then feel like another sort of stop on the trajectory, or is it like the European dream and, you know, the bohemian lifestyle available there, like calling you for good?
It is an interesting question that like it's to be seen. Like I don't know. Like like I had a bit like, if we're getting real, like the past year was like rough because like I moved in like, or my partner and I, we moved in, when was it? I think we got here in July 2022, and then like honeymoon phase, great, and then like the reality of like we don't fucking know anybody. If I hurt myself, I don't have an emergency contact. All this sort of like reality sets in, and you're like,
Right,
holy
sure.
shit, like this is wild. So that's one thing. But the other thing, which I think was the bigger maybe issue for me, is having lived in big cities, or not necessarily big cities my whole life. Like I lived in Atlanta, I lived in New York, I lived in LA, I lived in Seoul, Korea. Like I've lived in a lot of big cities and I understand how they function. I also understand what it's like, and I'm sure maybe you understand this as well, is like living in a place that's the center of the universe. Or not the center of the universe, but like it's a cultural capital.
Of
Like
a universe. Yeah, 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 sure.
of a universe, like living in it, and that's what drew me to LA, and sort of like really informed a lot of the work that I did, is that, or have done and continue to do, is like being able to go somewhere and like someone is like carrying a dog around their shoulders and being like, that's cool, that's probably something, and more people start doing that, and then a month later it's happening in New York or wherever, and it becomes an international phenomena, all because somebody at some coffee shop that someone saw started putting their dog around their shoulder, making it up. And
I was going to say,
being
I'm
here,
bummed that my wife took the dog on a little trip. No, otherwise I
I
would
mean,
get the dog on my
I had a
shoulder.
big dog that I used to do that with, but it was a whole thing. I do have a little dog who I would do that with sometimes, but I don't know where he is.
That's
But like
right.
being here, it's a different speed that I didn't think about until being here. And it was like,
Sure.
this is not a cultural capital. This is where a lot of Europe goes for spring break, but there isn't the sort of like pace, not necessarily the
Interesting.
pace, but like no one is looking to the city to sort of like make a trend, or like, you know what I mean, like, and a lot of cities
Yeah,
are that way, and
yeah.
that's
We
okay.
Yeah, well, sorry, I was gonna jump in and say it's interesting to hear you say that for two reasons. One, I mean, my own, I had that experience very acutely. I was early in my career. I was sent to Sydney for a year on a kind of
Mm-hmm.
what was a like executive training, foreign exchange type thing. And I had spent 3 years in New York, getting the city dialed. And I was really excited to go to Sydney because I had this job and it was the first time I was going to live overseas and stuff. And Sydney was so boring. It was so slow. It was so removed.
There's a bit
And,
of that.
and, and also, I mean, love to all of my Australian friends and viewers here, but it's like, there was particularly at that time, there was this parochialism and this provincialism about Australia that was very, very ingrained. They were just like, mate, this is the best place in the world. Like, what are you talking
Right.
about? And I was like, got guys. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I understand that completely. But the funny thing to hear you say that about Barcelona, and I empathize with it completely. But is that for me, Barcelona is a true Mecca, and it's because I grew up skateboarding, and skateboarding in
Right.
the early 2000s in Barcelona, it was like the world capital of skateboarding, and so much stuff came out of that
Yeah.
that I have always viewed it, and whenever I visited, I've always seen it through the eyes of like, this is a
Yeah.
Mecca.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you describe it as something
That's
kind of other than that.
fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I think that the culture definitely still exists in some ways, but it's also, I mean, that's fascinating because I had no idea about that, but I will
Yeah.
definitely be looking into. Um, but yeah, it's just like now it's sort of, and I'd been here when I was in high school in the early 2000s, and then coming here as an adult, you go to any new city, and you're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can live here. This is great. And like that sort of like was a part of our draw. But then the other part of it that you sort of know from being a local, sort of what you said about Sydney, is that it's sort of like, oh, this is a completely different speed. This is a totally different culture. They
Yeah.
have their own bubbles. They have their own things they're great at, they're not great at, etc. And like that, I think, is something that, like, you go to a London, you go to a Paris, go to New York, LA, and like you feel that sort of chargedness, and that like
Yeah.
anything can
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
that you don't have that here. And like it's not a read, like
Interesting.
part of that is great, but like the other part of that is like, okay, like I know that I can't get XYZ magazines or find XYZ brands or XYZ things, and like not because I want to buy them all the time, but just like to be able to interact with these sort of like things at the edge of culture,
Yeah.
that are going to dictate culture or are dictating culture, to just be able to experience that in some way and then do with it what I will. Like that has been like, at least for the trend report, it's been something that's was difficult for a while. Now I think I've sort of figured out ways to get that. Hopefully no one ever
Yeah.
realizes that like that's not happening in the same way that it was happening 2 years ago, but like that is something that I, it's a double-edged sword, because it's really great to not be
Sure.
in that sort of race. But the other part of it is like, you can't take that racer out of you. Like you want
Yeah.
to be able to compete if you have to, and like not literally, but you know what I mean. Like it's a muscle that
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
from living in big cities, and like once you sort of leave
Yeah.
that, it's there's a bit of loss. And I think I dealt with a lot of
Yeah.
that in the past year. Was like, no, I'm not like, no one is looking at anything. People stare me down
Well,
for wearing
okay.
shorts in the winter, and it's like, yo, okay, we're that like behind in a way, if you
You're saying, okay, so this and this gets to I think a convenient sort of point to lead the conversation a little bit. So you recently launched a kind of a paid tier to the trend report, or to the Kyle universe, and you should recapitulate the what each of the weekly dispatches does. But one of them recently was about how essentially you've started wearing pants, and by this we mean like below the like leg coverings that go below the
long pants,
knees, things
actual pants,
which you
yes,
actual
traditional
pants,
pants.
which you hadn't done apparently in a while. I thought that was, I mean, I think it's interesting, having come from Syracuse, like a place where people wear shorts year round as well to flex or whatever. It's I understand the impulse. I don't understand the practice, but I understand the impulse. But
Yeah.
I liked the fact that you were immediately introducing yourself as a like you were introducing yourself personally in that sort of interesting way, and then translating that into experience. So anyway, let's use that as a reason. What are the weekly dispatches, and what are you doing with each of them?
Yeah. So the main bread and butter, or not main bread and butter, like the thing that people come to the Trim Report for is the Sunday Dispatch, which is, you get a bit of politics, a bit of media culture, and a ton of memes and a ton of like jokes. And then in between is usually a more buttoned up topical politics. I don't know. Like the more adult, you get a more adult essay, and then you get a more like cultural.
State the
Yeah.
absurdity of the modern condition.
Yeah, you have to you have an essay that's more of your vegetables, and you have an essay that's more of your like dessert. So you get a bit of both. And that sort of like covers everything. I think that sort of like really is a sort of point of departure for everything. And then also like when I was thinking about like doing a paid vertical, I was like, okay, what do people really like about this? Talking to people, sending out some surveys, et cetera, and sort of hearing what people wanted. And it sort of broke down into two different things, which I think is a really fascinating, not easy thing to straddle. Is that I have one part of the audience who comes to the newsletter for the like, I gotta catch up, I gotta plan my week for work, I gotta know about stuff, yada yada.
Yeah.
And they really like respond to the links, and like I get that, and like that's where it really originated from. So the Friday Dispatch is basically like giving a more granular, like, these things are about to pop, these things are popping right now, this thing is going away. And that's really mostly thinking about like the social media manager or the whoever who is like, oh, I need to like, or the daily news producer who is like, oh, I got to think of things to pitch. And like that's sort of like ideally is a guide for you in some way. A lot of the stuff a lot of stuff you might not know. Like it's a mixture of stuff. And I think that the thing that I don't think happens enough is being able to point to like, this is happening now, and like tomorrow it's gonna go away. Or like this, it's on the Today Show today, it's over. Like if you didn't get in on this, bye bye. Like you're late. And I don't think enough people, especially say, and not that I'm writing to say corporate America, but I do think there are a lot of people who work at corporations and work at companies who follow it for that sort of stuff. And like it's a losing battle. Again, back to that sort of trend forecasting thing. You can never do it right. You're never going to be ahead of it. You're always going to be uncool in some way. You're always going to be cool to whatever. It's like just do your own thing at the end of the day. But hey, some people need that, so that's what that's for. And those people also sometimes will reach out and want other work for me to like take them on as a client. So like that is really important as well. The other part of that is the flip side is there are a lot of people who I'm very thankful for. I never thought I would be doing this in my life, is people who love the writing and people who just like want to hear more. And like that is, I would say, funny enough, is like where probably the bulk of people reaching out was like wanting to get more writing. There, people just being like, I want to just hear your point of view more. And it's just like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. So the Tuesday essay is a bit more lifestyle-y, a bit, well, not necessarily lifestyle, it's more just sort of like blogs with a capital B, and I try to make them more essayistic. I think the shorts one is probably that a version of it at its best. I think the one this week about sort of like female robots, if we will, was sort of almost like a fever dream that I was like, I originally was going to, and I still will write about like wearing dead people's clothes, which sounds very morbid, but it's about sort of like honoring, about clothing waste and about honoring sort of like your ancestors in the capitalist world by
Sure.
sort of like taking on their belongings. And like, I think the best, for me, the best way to do that is by wearing their clothes. And like, I think that's like a love letter that I don't think a lot of people think about, or I think about it a lot. And I
Yeah.
also know that I wouldn't be able to pitch that story to a publication because XYZ. So I'd rather do it myself.
Yeah.
But the like
Well,
the
it's
yeah,
although I wonder, given that we are in the new dawn of the personal essay, whether it isn't like a point that's made briefly through the newsletter and then causes someone
I
to sort of
mean,
ask you to expand upon it. Because the thing that I
absolutely,
think is really interesting about that, right, is that vintage, generally speaking, is much more a part, I would say, of, let's say, young people's lives than it was when I was, let's say, my kid's age, right, a teenager or something like that. It
absolutely,
is also faced with the incredible overproduction and hypercapitalization of the Sheins of the world, the Temus of the world, the Zara and H&Ms of the world.
hmm
The idea of right sizing the amount of stuff we consume and the lifespan of those items has to be a conversation that we have. And one way to socialize it is by
absolutely,
saying we want to honor not necessarily the people who are no longer in the world, who were involved in the creation or the commodification or the purchase of these things, but simply like the effort that went into it, right? Like this sweatshirt,
absolutely,
there's a story behind it from the person who made it, the person who grew the cotton for it, the
hmm
person who marketed it, yada yada yada. Like I don't know. It feels like there might be an angle there, and it feels like that personal essay is a way to
totally.
explore the way that you how to sink your teeth into it.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely the sort of area that I was thinking about it, and like I think that it's just, there was a world and there is a world where people, clothing is a thing that is and was handed down, like an old blanket that your grandmother made for
Yeah,
you. Like it's a very similar thing. And I think the other thing too as well, and I know I've written about this before in the term report, is like I have this, my partner Bob and I, we have a conversation about this every so often, is like we, as I think a lot of people have this sort of feeling now as, children who are America or American and just people of the world right now, is that like there aren't as many, say, heirlooms anymore. Like the thing
yep,
that, say, like your grandmother might give you would be maybe a, a Cuisinart. And like that's great, but like that is a fucking brand name thing. That's like I could get that off of
yeah,
eBay. And like I think a really good example of this is like Bobby's grandmother. She would always make these chocolate chip cookies. They were really amazing, and she made them all the time. It was her thing, and she would send them to us from upstate California. And after she passed, she like, or when she was sort of like aging, she taught me how to make them, blah blah
yeah,
blah, and gave me the
yeah, yeah,
recipe. And it wasn't until after she died that we sort of put the connection together. It was like, what is the origin of this recipe? Where did it come from? What's the story behind it? They're really good, very simple chocolate chip cookies. And I forgot, I don't remember if here I put it together, but I think it was sort of, we were looking at something like the Toll House, like chocolate chip cookie package, and connected that the recipe that she had been using, that she handwritten, was what's on the back of the chocolate chip cookie package today. And the old chocolate chip cookie packages that she had in the house still was what she was using. And like, that's a really great example, I think, of sort of like modern culture, is that like, it's this idea like ritualizing and or making sacred these things that are based in capitalism or in in a product that like we sort of can forget that it is ultimately a product, or like the basis of this wasn't because it is because I love baking, but like it wasn't because I developed this recipe. It was, or this, my grandmother handed it down to me. It was because like a brand was like, you should make this. And I made it and I kept making it. And like, I think that there's so many sort of stories like that that we all have, even though we don't intellectually think about that. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's just like, it's sort of like, unfortunately, it's like microplastics. Like, we're all fucking full of it. And like, these things are it's the same, like they're all connected. And like, I think that that's like, it's a comedy and a tragedy, but it's also like, anyway, clothing, I think, is at least a little bit more intimate, because like you can see how it literally was wearing on somebody, and like that's really special, and to feel that sort of physical presence.
One of the things that strikes me, I think almost every time I read the trend report, is that, and it's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, right, as opposed to having just this sort of disembodied, parasocial relationship through your written words, was that you strike me as somebody who can see the light and the dark sides in a story like that and analyze them for what they are without swinging heavily to one way or the other in terms of whether something is right or wrong. And it's funny because like having run commercial relationships, business relationships, advertising, marketing teams, whatever it is, for years, my job in a lot of respects was to say to this, media team, these media teams that I was working with, like, okay, guys, what we have to do is try to figure out what is the thing that our audience cares about or can identify with in this wider story that's actually valuable, right? It's not about going like, sell them this pen, right? This is a great pen, by the way. But funny enough, Powerpuff Girls merch from who was Powerpuff Girls? Was that Cartoon Network originally, or is it?
That was Cartoon Network.
It was Cartoon Network.
Cartoon Network.
These are like a 3-pack of Japanese Kaweco pens that Powerpuff Girls made as branded merch for, I don't know why, but my favorite
Good
pens.
for them. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but rather than saying to the audience like, this is the greatest pen in the world, it's like, okay, no, somebody designed this. There's a reason this works really well. Let's go and figure out who that person is and tell that story. And you strike me as someone who, not to accuse you of both sidesism at all, but that you can see and you can judge the merits, and then you can tell the story from either direction and ask people to then assess on its merits. And I just don't think there are a lot of people out there that do it. And then so I wondered how you'd respond to that and whether you think that's true.
I mean, I am glad to hear that, because like I feel like that's something that I sort of strive for, and I don't know if I'm always hitting that mark, but I do think that like it's always going to be biased. Like, I am a queer Hispanic person who is of a certain age. Like, it's always going to be coming from this point of view. But I don't think that like it's I think when I write, or at least I'm writing that sort of stuff, is like I'm trying to be my best self, and I think myself is able to do that and be really considerate and be really, not both sides. Like, I'm not saying that like, oh yeah, like fucking, I'm not even gonna make a comparison, but like, I'm not gonna say something is like good when it's bad. I think that there's like a whatever, but like, do try to definitely see like, okay, this is also what's happening too. This is what also people are saying about it. Because like, I'm a big believer in just like realism in general, and like I'm very optimistic and positive, but I do think like it's a disservice to not say, look at the really ugly bad thing, just to sort of see it, so it exists. And I think that's sort of like what has to, you can't just have it, you can't have it both ways, just the darkness or just the light. And I think that's like really important in the writing, and sort of as a, I wouldn't call what I'm doing like classic journalism, but like as that sort of journalistic practice, like it's a disservice not to shine the light in all areas, so to like see what's happening. And I think at its best, it's doing that. And like, does it happen all the time? No, but like I definitely aim for that to happen, because
Yeah.
again, like, what is that larger story? What is the larger story of culture, and what is it going to, how's it going to end? Like, what is the sequel to this going to look like? And that's sort of like what has
Yeah.
to be involved to
Well,
get there.
and right. And the when by happenstance, I'm, and this is a little bit of a digression, but I have been trying to watch a movie every day this month in February. And
Wow.
well,
That's
I put
impressive.
myself through I put myself through these rituals every year where I, like in February and October, I am straight edge and vegan for the month. It's just, it's a way of exercising whatever, my free will, if you want to call it that. But
Yeah,
sometimes
I
I
love
add
that.
additional things. And this year I added watch a movie every day. And I'm a little bit behind, but what I watched last night was My Dinner with Andre, which I don't know if are you familiar with
No,
the, okay.
I
So a
don't think so.
Louis Malle film written by Wallace Shawn, who was, he was
Yes, I know Wall
the
Sean.
prince
Yeah,
in, yeah, in
yeah,
or not the prince, he was the whatever.
yeah.
He was one of the guys in
Princess
Princess
Bride,
Bride.
the little guy, bald man. He was in Clueless.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But and funny enough, the Princess Bride, his whole sort of like character in Princess Bride seems to be a riff on himself in My Dinner with Andre. Highly recommended. You should watch it. I don't know if you guys have Max over there or if you have Criterion, but it's on both. Anyway, it is a full. It's just a dinner between two people where they each,
right.
one guy tells a whole series of outlandish stories about essentially like journeys of self-discovery, and there's a metaphysical element to the stories. You never see any of them acted out or personified, but and then there's this, Wallace Shawn is this kind of like very existentially minded neurotic New Yorker contending with these fantastical stories that are being written. Anyway, good. But the reason that I bring it up is that where I get your engagement in those conversations is more from like a philosophical and like I don't know what can, like you're contending with it yourself and you're contending with it in public, and I like that
Yeah, yeah,
fact because
yeah.
I think that's a big I think that's a big problem with capital J journalism, is that A, it doesn't acknowledge the beginnings, as you did a minute ago, of your own point of view, and B, it then acts as though it's beyond reproach even
Right.
if it acknowledges those
Absolutely.
things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think like that is, and that's sort of like if we're looking at the larger media, specifically journalism world right now, like it's in that sort of crisis of like, what does it like?
Yeah,
Is a journalist at the end of the day a creator? Like, is that, and is that a bad thing? Like, who's to say it is bad or good? Like, I don't like. Part of me in that sort of world is like, it's great because it's like, as individual people, we can fucking rely on LA Times or fucking Anna Wintour to make sure we're surviving. And like, these are ways for writers of all sizes to be able to make sure that they are getting food on the table, et cetera, et cetera. On the other end of that, it's a sort of tragedy of like, are we getting a full picture? Are you getting that holistic look
yeah,
at things? Are you getting sort of like the different voices? Because in a perfect world, you are getting that from your individual journalist, whoever, but even them, like, where are they getting that? Are you just hearing their view
yeah,
or whatever? And like, I think at the end of the day, like where that the sort of danger in that is like, it just increases those silos. Like it increases a sort of like, niches upon niches, which are great in theory, but like that's again, like you have to eat your vegetables as well. And that's like making sure that you're like
yeah.
looking at the other cultures and the other communities, because like it's just we're going to end up in these same situations where it's like, oh, why don't I talk to my dad or my brother because blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, dumbass, you didn't fucking like look at their internet too. What do they look at?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you don't have to agree. I'm not
It's
saying agree, but like,
it's so interesting. So I spoke a couple of weeks ago to Daisy Eliota, who does Dirt,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
who I think is very impressive generally. But she said something that I thought was really interesting, which is that she is relatively recently married. I've been married for 20 years this year, and so I'd sort of you forget about what it's like to contend with the new elements of your relationship. She said, she's like, the thing that I didn't know about essentially getting married or cohabitating with someone that has been a real thing to contend with is that you are essentially dealing with someone else's version of the truth. Like we all have our own versions of the truth, and which is not to say that your version of the truth is bad or antithetical or even opposed to mine, but just simply that it's different. And so you have to figure out how to reconcile that stuff. What I wonder about is how do you, from a news gathering standpoint, find sources that present, alternate versions or differently reflected versions of the truth just to keep yourself grounded?
Yeah, that is an amazing, difficult question because I think about it all the time. Is like, I sort of out of principle, like I'm not going to like link out to fucking Fox News. Like I really try not to, or like I will sometimes look and see some stories like what might come through there, but I will always sort of maybe qualify with a publication that I would rather support. But I think that it's, before I even get there, like there is a sort of like constant sort of fear. I'm like, am I just like an aggregator of the New York Times? Because like that, I think a lot of people do fall into, and like it's just like, oh my God, like it can't be this.
I mean, literally, I'm like, New York Times, FT, freaking Casey Lewis, public announcement, the trend report. I was like, well, I might as well just direct people to those things. And
that's like what and it's also, it's just funny. I mean, I think about this all the time too. It's just like, I think like eventually it's just gonna be like these echoes of newsletters. And it's like, hey, that's great. But also it's a funny thing of just like this, we're not peak, or maybe we're getting there. It's just like curation culture. It's like, there's too much content. So now you have to have Sherpas to take you through. But,
I don't think we're there. I don't think we're there yet. I think AI compounds that problem. I think you're no. I don't think we're even close. I think your role, my role, to the extent I want to assign myself that responsibility, becomes much, much more important as we go forward, particularly over the next 3 or 4 years. I think it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, true. And I think that like, so as far as the like looking for more expansive places to get news, like I think I do a few different things. Is that I oftentimes will listen to the people, let's say, is like I will look a lot on, say, like suggested posts on Twitter, which I know people shouldn't use, and et cetera, but I think it's still maybe the best platform if you are in a good silo. Like, look, I've just like, it's still, it feeds a lot of my machine. And then the same with TikTok is like, I go to those places really first, and sort of like, again, it's about identifying those conversations in general. And like oftentimes with identifying these conversations, what comes with that is other people's news sources coming as well. And like sometimes a tweet or a TikTok can be a news source at points. Like, I'm not saying like this, like a single TikTok is equivalent to New York Times or whatever, but like it is sort of like not important, but like it's something that I will also consider as well, oftentimes in conjunction with another news story about the same subject, or another, say, TikTok or TikToks about it. Because like I think that's really like, again, like here's a really good example is like I also do another version of the Trend Report that's the business edition, which is for people who basically will pay my hourly rate to get a daily sort of rundown, and like very few people are doing it. But like a thing that was included in the Monday report was like the who the fuck did I marry TikTok phenomena, which was like, that was like, it popped over the weekend, and like Monday was
I'm not familiar. So interested to know.
So it is like, Google it, because like it is now like, today is a day where it's like starting to peak. Like Rolling Stones did a story on it, like Daily Mail did. So like like it's now becoming the thing. But like I think that like something like that, if that were to happen on, say, Saturday or Friday of the week, I would have included just the TikToks, because like this is a phenomenon where like you have the source of truth, which is the who the fuck did I marry creator stories, the person who literally is telling you the story of who the fuck they married. From the other side, you have all the stories reacting to it, which is then creating a whole economy of it. A similar situation that happened with that, or in a similar way, was the Tabby Swiper. Do you remember that? I think that was like fall last year. And I think that sort of like, I remember seeing that happen on Twitter on like Friday or Saturday, whenever that broke. And I think I included it in the Trend Report on Sunday with just that stuff because like
I,
everyone's off. You're not going to get
yeah,
the think piece about it until Monday, Tuesday.
I think, sorry to interrupt you. I think I read about it from the Trend Report, and then probably Casey dimensionalized it on Monday or on. Anyway, yeah. So yes, I think I got that from you though. I think I found it in the Trend Report.
But I think that's exactly like where services or what newsletters outlets like us can really do a good job, or like our opportunity is to be able to collate that stuff, because you're never going to get this sort of like tabby swiper or who the fuck did I marry story within a day. And like you can, but like you're going to get it from a place that's like junkie.com or like Distractify or whatever. And like these are places that like really in a pinch I will link out to. But like those are more like I need something to qualify. Like I know with my journalistic eye or whatever I want to call it, this is a credible thing. Sometimes it will fuck up. I don't think it happens a lot, but like I know that this is a thing, and like even though the story doesn't exist yet, look at this TikTok or like these series of TikToks that are talking about it, because this is something you're going to want to know about, or that it will sort of have an effect on something. Like the who the fuck did I marry thing, like by the end of the week, she 100% is going to have like a book deal or a movie deal or whatever, and like it'll be the big story. Then will be like this is the first like this is the Zola of TikTok, like 100%. That's going to happen. It's like that storyline is going to happen. It's a really compelling story. Do I think that it deserves like a book or a fucking movie or whatever? No, like she already did it. Like, and that's also like the redundancy of these larger forces that be it journalism with a capital J or Hollywood, capital H, music industry, whatever. Is like they're so behind and don't understand how these things work, and that like that is the thing. Like you repeating the thing as a movie, who the fuck did I marry the movie, is just Mean Girls 2023. Like, sure, it can be successful, but like you just made the same thing, and like,
it's so funny you should say that. We had I'm not sure if you're aware, but every Wednesday I sort of chair, by which I mean I agree to show up to a breakfast club that is an open invitation. Anybody can come to it. And one of the things we talked about this morning, because of my movie mission for February, we were talking about movies, and somebody said the thing about Hollywood at the moment is that you literally cannot, and this is someone who had some insight into it, is like you literally cannot get something made at the moment that isn't based on some kind of previous IP. And we were like, okay, so what does previous IP mean? Like I worked for a while for as a consulting client for James Fry, who was the author, right? Famously disgraced, but famously famous author. And one thing that he told me that I thought was incredibly valuable was he was just like, look, there is from a copyright perspective, if you can publish something and make it for sale, it then bestows a series of IP rights upon that content that are different than if you just make a thing up and let's call it copyrighted, put a TM on it, Trend Report style. And which I thought was a fascinating observation. And James has obviously done really well with stuff other than just a million little pieces as a function of this. But it made me ask this question this morning. I was just like, okay, well, so supposing I then just publish something make it available as a like a 99-cent PDF through Amazon Shop, does that mean that it's previously available IP? And does that mean that you can then develop it? Because it doesn't really exist any more than it did if it was in hard copy on my desk, but it's in some other form that some gatekeeper, dictates as being valuable. I find it odd that we've gotten to that place, but maybe that's the case.
It's fascinating, and I've been in that machine, and it's like, this is so fucking dumb. Like they don't in Hollywood, at least, like it's just a lack. It's a simultaneous, like, if people think of Hollywood as such a liberal industry, which it quote unquote is, but it's so conservative ideologically.
Sure.
In the sense of like, it's not a creative expression. And like, I will often talk to not kids, but like younger people and be like, I know you want to be actor, singer, screenwriter, whatever, and that's beautiful, but also like you can't operate within that system. because if you're operating within the system, you're not going to get anywhere. And like, they're not going to see you for who you are. Like, you have to do it in your own world and build your own thing in this day and age in order to get anywhere. And like, that's the sort of IP thing coming in, because like, they're now like venture capitalists or whatever, in the sense that like, they're not going to bet on this unless they know it can sell. And like, that sort of trickled down into all the industries. And that's why, like, you know, the indie person can break out and then get the big label, which has always happened. But like, that now comes from a place of like, we know we can make money off of you. You did all the work already of like finding the audience and doing all of the sort of publicity.
Right.
Now we can sort of like maybe amplify and give you more money. Like, it's a very vampiric system that like
turn on the jets. Turn on the jets.
Yeah, it's like, and I think that sooner that creatives, more so creatives, and this sort of platforms themselves sort of realize this and stop trying to operate by dated playbooks, is the day something changes. And I'm still shocked it hasn't happened yet. Like, even the platforms themselves, meaning like the channels or YouTube or whoever, have the power to break it, but they haven't done it. Like, even like, for example, I worked at MTV for a few years in 2007, 2008, in back and forth before and after that. And like, I remember being there as an intern and being like, why aren't you guys playing music videos, and why aren't you like putting stuff on MySpace on there? Like, this would be so interesting and fun. Like, it's what we care about. Like, fucking I Can Has Cheeseburger lolcats. It was like, this is what's cool. And like, them being like, no, The Hills, Jackass, etc. And like the sort of franchise world, and that sort of like looking at the money and the reliability of something. And again, that was a time when it was like, you know, you didn't have money for, say, linear or scripted because of myriad different economic factors.
Yeah, sure.
And like, that sort of like put MTV on the trajectory that we're on now. Is like, they literally have Drag Race on, which started in fucking Logo, which then VH1 stole. Now it's on MTV so that it can sort of like keep that ship afloat. It's not there because it's cool. It's there because like, Drag Race is one of the few franchises that Viacom has to keep it alive. And like, it's there because MTV is drowning. And like, that happened in the early 2000s, and being there and being like, you guys, you're thinking this too literally. And like, you have the power to really recreate a new dichotomy, and like, it didn't exist. And I think that's sort of like, again, like, they're really antiquated ways of thinking in such industries that all creatives sort of aspire to. It happens in the book world as well. But it's just like, what? Yeah.
No, sorry, I cut you off. Go. Or if there was a final point there.
That was it.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we have gotten to 53 minutes into an hour-long conversation. We haven't even talked about the links that you thought were interesting from SIC this week, which is on the one hand, like by design, this has been a fascinating conversation. But by the same token, I also want to point to it because you really, you know, met me where I am, as the kids say, or as I'm told the kids say, in terms of saying like, here are not only the links, and these are the things that I find interesting, but here is commentary about them, and here are sub stories that link to them in an interesting way. Because we don't have a ton of time, I want to drill into one in particular, which was, there's a story about whether or not we can keep our sons from sliding to the right. And it's in The Cut this week, which is, you know, been a very hot property over the last couple of weeks. And you could argue over the last couple of years. But then so you said, and I'm going to just read this. I think this fits in. Oh, and then, sorry, you created a corollary to another story from the Wall Street Journal that, I think it's the Wall Street Journal. It's men who used to have stylists. Let me just click on a image. Yeah, it's the Wall Street Journal. And you basically said in linking them, I think this fits into the above and the teen item below, which is about, I don't know which teen item it is. Oh, teens getting around the teen ban. The teen item below. I think this has a lot to do with the crisis of heterosexuality and the pursuit of being, quote, alt. I would have several nickels for the straight friends of mine who went from alt dudes to, quote, just asking questions types. It's time for men to stop being cave people. And a lot of this has to do with the parents' IMO. It's very, why is your baby at the bar? New link. I've got to click on that and figure out what it is. Multiplied by girlies finding better kinship in girlies. Another link I've got to go find. But once this genre of hetero men discovered bi-curiosity is over, we will have the wildest, likely even more gender fascist culture while we are seconds away from this. Please talk about that, please, because I think it's an encapsulation of what I love about the Trend Report, and it's also a fascinating connection that I would not have made myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, like the cut story, I feel like that story comes out every like twice a year. It's like our sons, they're going to become Republican nightmares, which is like true.
It's like
true.
It's like the straight edge scene that I grew up in. Like it will never die because there will always be 14-year-olds. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
100%. And there will always be sort of like a desire for counterculture no matter where you are. And like I think that like that was really like what that sort of gets at is, and like it's again like teens aren't happening in a vacuum, or even tweens now with like Sephora kids, etc. It's like they're just modeling adult behavior, and like they're seeking power, they're seeking to be different, and like in a world, and like again, like what that teen story is saying is like something that I have heard echoed in my father, and like in like like people my age. Like it's the same thing, but like the teens are able to take it to a place at its sort of most unrefined and most grotesque, because they don't have the sort of wherewithal to maybe shape it down and make it more beautiful or make it a little bit more palatable, marketable, whatever you want to say. So like that was sort of like that, and like the stylist story, and then thinking in tandem with the sort of like, again, lived experiences and all the stories about like women not wanting to date men, and this sort of single epidemic or whatever you want to call it. It sort of is creating this space of just like the like incels have taken on this new sort of like, it's not incel culture, but like it's not incel culture of just this like, we feel like we are oppressed because people are just holding us accountable, and like we're lashing out by sort of adopting contrarian thinking. And like it's exactly what say like Elon Musk is doing. Like it's that sort of like, I'm trying to be cool by being countercultural in just like a sort of very surface level way, and like that comes from being misogynistic and from being a little bit racist and a little bit homophobic and whatever. Like the same thing was happening when I was in college, the same thing happening when I was in high school, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's the same thing, but like I think now it's sort of in a different context of more information being available, and the sort of like, women are tired of it, and like they can have more power and they can whatever. And like I think that it's this sort of thing we will continue to see where like men have to like do the fucking work or they're going to be lonely. And like it's happening across the board, like more and more. Like I haven't been able, like this is like a big Trend Report story I've been wanting to sort of like write, but like I don't think the proper story has happened yet where I can tether it to. And maybe I'll just write it. Is like, my mom has talked about a friend of hers who is still married, who now lives in a separate house from her husband. And she talks about that with a bit of envy and desire, and just like, that sounds really interesting. We know what that means. And like, that is the same thing that we're seeing now in young millennial women or whoever who are like, I'm not going to fucking marry these fucking idiots. I would rather just hang out with my girlfriends or myself, because like they get me more than this person would get me. And like, I don't want to fucking deal with what I have to deal with at work at home. And like, instead of men maybe, or whoever, taking the opportunity to be like, let me think more critically about this and let me sort of change, here we are. And like, again, the trickling down to teens, whatever. But like the sort of like bi curiosity thing that I'm like, it's going to happen any day now. And like, it really is on both sides, is like, you're going to have women who are like, I don't need men. Should we? And then like them starting to date each other, and or like maybe even like queer mask men, whatever sort of expression you want to say, also maybe turning to these bi-curious women too and having really fruitful relationships, maybe non-sexual relationships between gay men and bi straight women. Like I could see that happening, because it's like, you get me and you love me more than these people would. On the other end, you have like the men who are going to turn fucking Athenian and just like start realizing that like, wait, I'm gonna get graphic, I'm sorry, like, you have a penis and you understand how to use it. I have a penis and I know how to use it. We can do the same thing to each other, and really get the sort of pleasure that we want and sort of like yell at each other. And what like is going to be a sort of like UFC sex edition that's going to happen with like straight men in a way. And like it's going to happen on both sides, where it's going to become this sort of like, well, we don't need women, blah, 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 blah. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like it's going to become this sort of like grotesque.
Well, it's,
and again, the counterculture of it all. Like they might not even be gay, but it's just like, I'm doing this because it's like, well, fuck you. Like you know what I mean? Like it's also exaggerated, but like,
well, of course. And I think I think that's the thing, right? It's you know, in my imagined mind, there is somebody listening to this conversation, watching it, etc., who will say the same thing about what you just said as the thing you said a minute ago about this is just that same story that I heard when I was, you know, there'll be some,
absolutely,
you know, elder statesman who's just like, oh, that was 1974, right. You know, whatever it was, which is in a certain respect awesome, because it well, not only is it valid, but it also illustrates the fact that these phenomena are not specific and exclusive to this moment, but rather they are being seen through the contemporary lens, but they are evergreen sort of conditions.
They're not unique. And I think that that's something that like is if you're a prisoner of contemporary time, it's like everything is new, everything is now, but like that's not true. And like
no,
I think that's even like something that I'm starting to contend more and more within the trend report, is that like I'm starting to reference old trend reports, and like that is sort of indicative of the like these things that were like in not that short of time periods they're repeating itself. But, like all that to say is that like I think these like to that point is like this is not new. It happened when I was in high school. I'm sure it happened when you were in high school, and everybody was in high school. The difference I think is that it's like the technology, like that second link of like the girlies finding kinship in girlies, is like a woman being like, why would I have a relationship? A TikTok of a woman being like, why would I have a relationship when like I like literally the person who I tell all of my problems to and who I send gifts to and who sends me gifts when I'm feeling bad are my best girlfriends. Like, why would I need a man? And like that, I think is the difference, is like we're able to sort of, the people who are feeling that way can hear stories like that from each other. And then on top of that, it's also like queerness becoming simultaneously more and less taboo. Like it's only a matter of time before it's like, I'm so countercultural that I'm blah, blah, blah. Like that was the thing. I remember when I, like before I came out, like I was in college and saying like I was like bi because I was like a hipster, like American apparel wearing person. And it was like, well, I'm just like bi because it's cool. And it's like, okay, honey, no. But like, it's like, it's all, again, it's the same, but like it just sort of will take on more and more exaggerated, grotesque versions of itself, which is, I don't know, maybe everyone would just be gay and it'll be great.
Well, somehow. It's just look. I think it's interesting though, and it's interesting to see how it tracks against, you know, general fears of a broad apocalypse and the end of cultural, the end of culture and whatever else. I mean, all these stories were being told by the right or whomever.
But I think the thing with it as well is like these things can be true, these stories can be true, and like I think like the teen one is unique because I think that is happening in this as much in the cities as it is in the country, in the heartland, and wherever you want to call it. But I do think that there's specific varieties of it that are maybe only unique to cities and just city people getting all in a tizzy. And like that's often like the other thing, like with sort of doing the work that we do, where it's like I have to be really careful to be like, I don't know who I'm talking to sometimes, but it's like I don't want to just be like, well, I'm just regurgitating an LA and New York conversation, because that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the LA and New York people. That's just sort of like fanning, like giving them a bone. It's like that doesn't. No, let's sort of look beyond that, because like I think again, like I think the key to getting out of the traps of modern culture is more self-awareness, which I feel like we all have, but I don't think people are using it correctly, because it's like we all know the think pieces are think piecing. Like
I think that's wow. I mean, I love that. I think, or I don't know if I love it. I don't love it. But I appreciate very much that characterization, which is that we all have self-awareness at our fingertips, but not very many people are using it. I mean, and I think that's absolutely right. Then again, you know, not to lean on the Gibson truism that the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed, but it feels like that kind of self-awareness, self-actualization is like happens drips and drabs, person by person, group by group, and you know, eventually spreads and mutates. Well, listen,
Yeah.
Kyle, this has been really fascinating. We could go on for hours, I'm sure, but I do want to be conscious of time, knowing that it is, practically dinner time there now at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Well, listen, it's really been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you a little bit. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you for all of the amazing work on the Trend Report. Everybody.
Likewise.
I subscribe. I pay to subscribe. I strongly subscribe. Encourage everybody else to do so too. And Kyle, I would just to whatever extent this is encouragement, like please keep doing what you're doing because it's awesome.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to keep on keeping on, and everybody keep on keeping on. We need more people who are thinking critically and offering a little hope.
Yeah, I agree.
We're starved.
All right. Well, listen, Kyle,
Anyway.
Thanks very much. Have a great night. And hopefully this will be the first of many conversations, but we'll talk again soon.
Yes, please. Thanks.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.